Hello there, and I have something different for you on the Great Legal Marketing YouTube channel right now. As always, I'm Charley Mann, the Chief Marketing Officer of Great Legal Marketing. But instead of marketing today, I have a special guest for you whose focus is cybersecurity and cloud computing for professional services. His name is Cayce Borden. He is the Managing Director of Blankenship IT Solutions, and he's going to share with us some sometimes pretty scary things that could be happening right now in your law firm that you may not know about. I'll tell you all that real quick. We have a lot of best practices that we use at Ben Glass Law that are exactly akin to what Cayce is going to talk about, but he has also a special report on 4 things you should be paying attention to. Go to the description below, click on the link, download that report from Cayce, get tapped into his system. He's got great information for you. And Cayce, thank you so much for taking time to talk about this important subject.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so Cayce, let's start from kind of a basics perspective. There's a lot of talk about cybersecurity, especially for law firms, doctors' offices, professional services, because they have sensitive data on hand. What are some of the steps that every law firm, and I think some of the stuff that you're going to talk about, really every individual human being should be doing in order to make life a little bit more secure? Maybe something they could even do today to help them out.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people, both for their personal life and for their professional life, can follow some simple best practices and put a few tools into place that can help significantly keep you secure. One of the first things, and this is definitely low-hanging fruit, something you can do right now, is turn on two-factor authentication for everything. When I say everything,
I always want to clarify on something like that, because I've heard that term many times. I know what it is, but I also know that sometimes I've said that and see that like questioning look where people don't necessarily ask what it is, even though they should. So what is that?
So two-factor authentication is what we've always done traditionally is one factor, which is a username and a password.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically something you know, which is your password. You add a second factor, which is something you have. So something you have is generally a text message, an app, or something like that. So you have your username and your password, which is your first factor. Second factor is a text message, an email with a code, or a push to a smartphone asking, is that you trying to log in?
So that's like when I get that text message from like my Verizon account or something like that, that's sending me that 6-digit code. That's the second factor of authentication.
Yes, absolutely.
So why is that so important? What is this preventing?
So the idea here is if all you need to log into an account for you is a username and password, anybody can log into that account, whether it's you. A lot of times people don't turn on two-factor authentication to make their lives easier. And in this day and age, cyber criminals, hackers, people with malicious intent, they know that. And sorry, I'm getting blown up here. Bear with me one second. And work from home, it's always fun, right? So hackers know that. So if they have malicious intent and they log in and they can get in with just the username and password, they can access whatever. So, my advice is always, if you have any sort of system, anything that's connected to the internet that you have to log in with the username and password, turn on two-factor on it. This is bank accounts, credit card accounts, social media. If you have a CRM system or some sort of database out there, that is great information for a hacker to steal. And that is a quick way to breach your client's trust and, have issues. So by turning on two-factor authentication, you would know if somebody's trying to get in, you get the notification. You're sitting, on the beach in Aruba and your phone says, hey, is that you logging in? You're nowhere near your computer. It notifies you that somebody else is trying to get in. Another piece of advice I have is if you have systems that don't offer two-factor authentication, you should seriously consider switching to something that does, or, push that system provider to offer it if they don't now.
Now, I think one of the things that people can come into conflict with here with two-factor authentication is that it does add an extra step that they do see as complicating. It's not necessarily the law firm owner, but it might be some staff who have concerns, or they feel like, oh, this is adding one more thing to my day. I've already got enough one more things. So maybe to help the law firm owner who's thinking about doing this, communicating with their staff, what are you essentially protecting? What can go wrong if you don't have something like this in place?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have no clue if somebody else is getting into those systems as well, besides your staff or you, or your trusted people that you work with on these platforms that you're using. So I have implemented two-factor authentication for hundreds of people, and varying industries and firms that have sensitive information. And change management is one of those things that people tend to struggle with. And so just setting the right expectation on the front end of, hey, this is going to be a little bit different, but over time you just kind of get used to it. And in 6 months' time, you'll forget that it was even such a big deal when you turned it on.
Yeah, I know for law firms, and I've heard some of the horror stories, including a firm, estate planning firm that keeps a lot of financial information, potentially keeps information about trust accounts where there's potentially a lot of money in place, where they have been at risk for huge liabilities because someone got into the system and set a ransom on it. So that idea of ransomware, malware, all of these other scary wares that are out there. It's a lot easier to get into that stuff if you don't have the two-factor authentication, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole idea. And we'll cover on some other areas here in a minute that, shows that is possible, and, give you some more reason why you should turn that stuff on. One of those next ones is, using a password vault. So with this whole idea of two-factor authentication, you are turning on another layer of security. But what a lot of cyber criminals rely on is the fact that most people reuse the same password for everything. Mm-hmm. And if you're not using the same password, they're reusing the same password scheme at the very least. So there are some studies out there that show your standard person has 90 different accounts that they have usernames and passwords for, and they have to log into. And that's, I laugh at 90, being an IT professional, thousands. I manage thousands of usernames and passwords. And so, an easy way to ensure that you're not reusing the same password over and over is to implement a password vault. There's several of them available out there. The whole idea is you let the vault remember the password, and then you don't have to. Any vault this day and age has the ability to access that information from an app on your phone. So maybe you're not at your own computer, you can still access that information. Most of them these days have a plugin for Chrome or Firefox or Safari or whatever your browser of choice is, so it will automatically enter them. But if you're implementing a password vault, it takes another one of those steps out of your day of having to remember it. You'd be surprised at how easy it is for me if I need to get into somebody's system. Maybe it's a client that I work for, and Susie is out for the weekend or the week, and they need to get on Susie's computer for something. More times than not, I can get into somebody's computer with a simple password or find it around their desk, on a sticky note. Maybe to them it's cryptically written down, but I know a lot of tips and tricks. I'm a good guy. I'm not a bad guy. So, a bad guy who does this stuff, and that's their job. Just adding another layer that's easy to do is absolutely a smart thing. The one key point, don't forget to turn on two-factor authentication for your password vault.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I know there's some out there, LastPass, 1Password. Those are a couple that I've heard of. I know that I've used one or the other in the past and currently do. We were lucky enough that we had some of this information fed to us some time ago. But I know that with the members of Great Legal Marketing, when we first started telling them, hey, here's some of the IT security risks that you should be addressing, 80% of them found at least one significant gap. Because, correct me if I'm wrong here, Cayce, but even with pretty good cybersecurity, if a firm's sort of doing it, a law firm's DIYing it, they've probably got some type of gap. Maybe it's a smaller gap than most firms are just totally unaware. But 80% had a major gap, including often multiple employees who were using highly not secure passwords like password 123.
Yep.
Which we all know is like super common. And how are people still doing it despite all the articles published on how common it is?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it just gets back to the whole idea of people want to make their lives easier. And, you forsake security with ease of access. And, I can quickly rattle off the passwords I would use if I'm trying to get in as, password 1, password with an @ sign, password with an @ sign and a 0 instead of an O, change me 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, these are the things that I'm going to try if I'm trying to get into somebody just without even knowing anything about that person. And there's a list that gets published every year of the top 100 worst passwords. And I'll have a link to that on my blog here for you guys to check out. And if you find your password on that list, you definitely need to go change it. One of the other flaws that people will often find if they're going to go through this is the ability for people, even if we're not talking about, having a secure password or what have you, is cyber criminals are preying less on systems and more on people. So the idea that, they're using sophisticated malware to break into your system and do all these crazy tricks. I mean, that's stuff for movies for the most part. I mean, it does happen, but it's a numbers game. So basically, they're preying on people. They want people to give them information, or they want to go find information about people and use it for nefarious purposes. One of the best ways, and the ways that most cyber attacks start, is through a phishing email. So successfully phishing somebody. And, your owner of a law firm, managing partners of a law firm generally aren't going to fall for it. They probably don't even check their own email at the end of the day, right? Like, let's be honest here. So they've got somebody else handling a lot of that for them. So it's generally the staff or, somebody that works for you that's more likely to fall for that phishing email. And if you don't know what phishing is, then, you need to know. And I would like to help you learn about that. But the idea is, most cyber attacks start with, hey, they sent an email out to hundreds of thousands of email addresses, just hoping that somebody is going to willingly give them a username and password. And they're going to, they're going to obfuscate where it's coming from. It looks legit. It looks like it came from Office 365. It looks like it came from Dropbox or common systems that they know people use, and just hoping that somebody is busy, they're not paying attention, or they just don't know. And willingly give them a username and password that then they'll go use to log into your Dropbox or your Office 365 or whatever account. And then that gets back to two-factor authentication.
It is really interesting how some of these emails, these phishing emails, are so basic at times, because in some cases, I think that the basic works. An example for me, Cayce, that I've seen, that I was fortunately able to identify pretty easily, was getting an email that looked like it came from Ben. And it looked like Ben was saying, hey, I'm not sure if you're in the office yet this morning, but could you do a little favor for me? And that was really all that the email said. Seems very simple. Like that would be a real email. The way I was able to identify the fact that it was probably suspicious was actually first because it said, hey, Charles. And I go by Charley, and Ben has only ever called me Charley. And so I looked at that, I was like, that's weird. And that then made me look at who it was actually sent by, because, when you read the line, it looks like it's sent by Ben Glass. But if you click on it to find out what that email address is that it was sent from, it's like some mishmash random @yahoo.com email address or something like that. Most people don't even know to click on something like that, right?
Right. Yeah, and you can oftentimes even just hang your mouse over a link, and it's going to tell you where it came from. And here's a couple of tips to think about when it comes to phishing and just some quick, simple tips. And that's one: hang your mouse over a link, and if it looks weird, it probably is. It's probably like if it doesn't look like something that has to do with the content of the email, it's probably trying to send you to somewhere bad. If you have some sort of mail filtering set up, oftentimes those things can get blocked. But one thing to think about, so in your example that, Ben is sending you an email saying, hey, do me a favor. If you reply to that, he's probably going to say, hey, we're going to send some gift cards out to, some of our valued clients. Can you go and buy $1,000 worth of Best Buy gift cards or some random thing? That's one of the big scams right now.
Yeah.
But although it's a numbers game, your guys' firm is a target. The small, medium, large, whatever, small firms are a great target for people to go after because they know that they're not going to have two-factor authentication. They're going to be using simple passwords. Why are they going to get after me? I'm a small firm. Nobody knows about me. I'm not, a huge national firm. That's a great target. But so again, specific to your example, people go and look at your website and they say, who are the people that I need to try to get at this firm? They see Charles Mann on that list. And so they'll create an email that has information about Ben and make a signature that looks like Ben's signature. And then they'll try to send it internally to look like, to send somebody. They don't know that your name is Charlie. So that is a great tip that if you use one name in your marketing materials or on your website versus what you actually go by, yeah, that is always a great indicator too. That's a good tip in itself right there.
It is remarkable what they can do with very little information because exactly like you said, Cayce, it's less about that sophistication and it's more about human behavior. The hope is that, Caitlin, the paralegal, who doesn't really necessarily view the cybersecurity threats in the same way, is just going to see something like that. They're going to see like a PDF attached that looks like it's come from a client or a medical provider. And they're just going to happily click on that. And then in the PDF, it's going to say, you can find the rest of the medical records here. Click on this link. And that link ends up being the one that exposes the whole firm to danger. It's simple. It's insidious.
Yeah. And they send it out to, it's a campaign, just like a regular marketing campaign. It's a campaign they're trying to drum up some quick money. So, a small firm probably finds it hard to get that information in front of the paralegal, the front desk person, all of that. And there are definitely systems out there both to offer continuous security education just through, quick videos and a quick test that will then, build a report and, tell the person who this matters to, who's actually watching these videos, who's taking them, and then to take it a step further to test your users and send them a test phish and see if they fall for it. And there's some great tools out there for that as well. That's the best way to know if they're going to fall for it. Test them, and it's not a, hey, you fell for this, you're fired. It's a, hey, you fell for this and we need to talk about this and make sure you understand why it's important to pay attention, that, your clients are what put you in business, and
Yep.
taking care of them is paramount. And the quickest way to lose a whole bunch of clients is to have a data breach that you have to report. And we could probably sit here for an hour and talk about all of the different states and their requirements. And like, even if you don't work in certain states, if you have data on people in other states, like you have laws that you have to adhere to that, even though you don't have a brick and mortar in New York, they have some pretty hefty laws out there that if you don't know about, you should probably go look into the SHIELD Act.
Yeah. So, in general, I like the language that you're using also, Cayce, where this is kind of what we're doing with cybersecurity isn't just necessarily about like cybersecurity. It's actually about client care. It's about client service, because that's a framework that a paralegal, an associate attorney, a receptionist will respond to in a more friendly way. Now, the last thing that I know we want to talk about is kind of this mythical thing that we hear about, and you see people using it, you know, in crime stories and stuff. That's the dark web.
Yep.
So what should people know? What should a lawyer know about the dark web?
So it's important to know just a really quick brief on what it is,
Mm-hmm.
and why people use it, and what sort of information is out there. So yeah, I mean, you watch some TV show or a movie, you know, there's a screen that has a bunch of numbers going up and down, and people are like, they never use a mouse and keyboard. They just use the keyboard and they type a lot, and then they, you know, they get information and they're hacking. So it could be that if you wanted it to be, but what it really is it's a collection of web pages that aren't available through Chrome or Firefox or Internet Explorer. You have to use a different type of browser in order to get there. And then the dark web has it has good things about it, and it has bad things about it. Some people use the dark web to share information that may not be mainstream. They may use it to communicate in a, you know, a lower level of the internet. You know, that could be for topics about media or about politics or about, you know, conspiracy theory or any of these things. So it is used for educational and communicating purposes, but it's also used for criminal activity as well. You know, people use it to any type of crime that you want to think about can happen there. You know, whether it's drugs, illegal weapons, what have you. But one of the biggest ones is identity theft. I mean, that is a huge watering hole for people who are into identity theft, data breaching, stealing information. So that's the quick, what is it? And kind of, you know, don't be scared of it, but it is really good to know what information is available for you personally, as well as for your firm. You know, oftentimes it's going to be usernames and passwords for you or your firm or what have you. That information can get onto the dark web in a couple of different ways. One is you fall for the phishing attack, and maybe the person who did the phishing attack on you doesn't really care what your username and password is. They're going to bundle that up and sell it to somebody else who does care, who wants to do that. So that's one way. They actually infiltrate you and they collect information about you. Maybe they breached you and they stole your client database. They're trying to sell your client database. But then the other side is kind of things that you have no control over. When there's a breach of LinkedIn, there's a breach of Facebook, there's a breach of Zynga. You play Words with Friends on your phone. You use your same password, one password on Zynga. That information gets scooped up, put on the dark web, and then that information is out there about you. So if you're following a lot of these best practices that we're talking about here, it's good to know about. It's just good to know that that information is there. But at the end of the day, you know, just having that information at hand and knowing that, like, this is available for me and for my firm, and then doing something about it, changing those passwords, knowing not to reuse those passwords because it's obviously out there.
Yeah, and I know, you know, an IT professional like you can and will do a dark web scan for people you're working with, you know, regularly updating them if there are any breaches. And I think the point that you made, Cayce, about something as simple as the Words with Friends, as the Zynga account, it's not always the accounts that we assume would be the hackable thing. They're going around and they're finding the day-to-day rigmarole. Here's how I entertain myself. If they could get their hands on, you know, people's Netflix passwords, they'd have their passwords probably for their banks because they're using the same one. And then it gets traded. And, you know, correct me if I'm wrong again, but sometimes this can take a little bit of time to happen. You know, even if there was a breach, this is why they always say, if there's been a breach, change your password right away, because damage may not have been done already because that information hasn't necessarily been sold or traded. So just make those changes. Any recommendations on terms of changing passwords, any other small actions people can take?
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument in my community around what best practices around passwords right now. And the argument has been, like, the classic advice is just have a rotating, change your password every 90 days and enforce that. And I mean, that's not bad. You know, you're never bulletproof. So that's something to know. Like, you know, IT security is, you don't arrive at IT security. It's always changing. It's a constant thing. It's a tug of war, basically, between what you should do and what you need to be doing tomorrow. So we definitely rotate passwords for most of our clients, just because, you know, if it's a moving target, it's harder to hit.
Right.
But there are a lot of people who say, hey, if you're using two-factor authentication, you're using a password vault, you're using complex passwords that are not the same across the board, as long as you're following that, then you don't really need to change your passwords. So they're both true. I mean, there's merit to both of those arguments. So it depends on your style, I guess. If you're going to go high tech, follow security best practices, and you know for a fact that all your passwords are different, then I mean, that's good. But, you know, you don't have to.
I will say that with our law firm, you know, the process of moving to a managed IT secure platform at first did, like, it stressed people out a little bit because we had to learn a new system. But just as you said earlier, it became very normal. And I think we're all really grateful now for it, because there is that feeling of less risk, of having procedures and policies. And it also means for any firm that's hiring people regularly, when you bring someone on board, you're not necessarily bringing on their bad habits with cybersecurity because they have to use your system, because most of these systems that are managed by a professional like you have to be interacted with in a certain way, because you're trying to take some of the human element out of it, essentially. And, you know, I'll refer everyone again to the links below, to the information from Cayce, from Blankenship IT Solutions, that they should absolutely go check that out, and get that report and any other free information that Cayce has available, because this is something that every firm should do. It seems like a nuisance sometimes, but like having a good insurance policy, you're so grateful when it kicks in.
Yeah, it's a bigger nuisance to then, you know, have to, if you have a cyber liability policy for your firm, it's an even bigger hassle to have to make a claim there, tell your clients, you know, follow reporting standards for that. I mean, what's worse, having to spend an extra 10 seconds, you know, each time you log in, or potentially losing your entire firm or your trust or your credibility because you suffered this and, you know, had the means to be able to stop those types of things. So,
and I do earnestly recommend that law firm owners look at having a managed IT solution rather than trying to patchwork it together, rather than trying to DIY this, for two reasons. Number one, like I said earlier, you still end up having, unless you are, you know, a previous IT professional yourself who then became an attorney, you may have some legitimate gaps there that expose you. Also, what we found was when we went with a more integrated solution, there's actually a lot more cross-platform, cross-device integration than we had anticipated. It actually made some of our workflow easier by having some of our systems up in the cloud that hadn't been before. And we had a lot of cloud systems, but we were using kind of a funky login remote desktop patchwork piece. So having that, you know, our IT provider was able to say, hey, you know, you could be doing this, right, instead of that. I'm sure, Cayce, that's an experience that you have with some of the attorneys.
Well, absolutely. And I guess the hallmark of a good IT professional in my mind is they're going to be talking to you about how your business works and figuring out how to create a system that helps your business work. You know, if they're talking to you about what kind of computers you should have, and they're talking to you about the type of network and all of that, they're probably focused more on the technology and less on the business. And that's okay. Like, you know, we all have our lot in life of what we do, but really being able to translate the technology into a business conversation around, you know, not focusing on the features of why we should do this, but how it's going to actually really help your business at the end of the day. And that's, you know, my 2 cents on that.
Very good. Okay, so everyone, just links in the description below to find out more information about cybersecurity, get more information from Cayce, and start there. He may be the guy ultimately to help you out implementing this in your practice as well. But please read his free information. It could potentially save you a lot of headaches in the future. Cayce, thank you so much for this information, for your time, man.
Absolutely. Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate it.